David stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, the front door of the house he no longer owned, clicking shut behind him. The sound was so final, so perversely gentle for the violence it represented. It was a solid oak door, 6 panels, with a brass handle he had polished himself just last Saturday. Now it was a barrier. Behind it was the life he had helped build for 15 years. Ahead of him was nothing but the crisp, indifferent November air and the long, curving driveway that led to a world that no longer wanted him. He could feel her watching. Eleanor. His wife, no, his soon-to-be ex-wife. Her silhouette was a rigid shape of judgment in the grand bay window of the master bedroom. He didn't need to see her face to know the expression it held. A mask of cold, serene triumph. This was the final act of her play, the scene where the unwanted supporting character was written out of the script. She believed she had taken everything. The sprawling Tudor-style home in the most exclusive suburb of Northwood. The 2 German luxury cars, a sedan for him and an SUV for her, both registered in her name. The joint bank accounts, now systematically drained into a private one he couldn't touch. Their children, Lily and Thomas, who were upstairs, likely told that their father was going on a long trip. Even his career, a casualty of a boardroom execution orchestrated by her father. She had stripped him down, she thought, to the shivering, pathetic core of the man she had decided he was. A charity case, a failure, a ghost to be exorcised from the House of Thorn. David shifted the weight of the single, worn duffel bag in his hand. It contained 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a worn, leather-bound journal. He looked up at the window, not at Eleanor's silhouette, but at the window of his daughter's room, where a small, painted star still clung to the glass, a remnant of a galaxy they had created together on a rainy afternoon. A pang, sharp and breathtaking, shot through his chest. That was the part that felt like a physical wound. The children. Eleanor thought the game was over. She had checked every box, secured every asset, and declared herself the winner. But in her arrogant, meticulous accounting, she had forgotten to check what he kept. She had never thought to look inside the quiet man who fixed the leaky faucet, who helped with impossible math homework, who sat through endless, condescending family dinners with a placid smile. She had never considered that his silence was not weakness, but observation, that his patience was not submission, but strategy. While she was busy taking the material things he had never truly valued, he had been carefully, quietly, and ruthlessly keeping the one thing that mattered, the one thing that would, in time, unravel her entire gilded world. Within 6 months, the door that had just clicked shut would be the very door she would stand before, begging to be let in. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? To be completely misjudged, to be cast aside by the people who are supposed to know you best. Have you ever felt that sting of being underestimated? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. We've all had moments where we wished we could show them all. Well, stick around, because David was about to do just that. The end had begun, as so many ends do, at a dinner table. It was the previous Tuesday, in the cavernous dining room of the Thorn family estate, a place that always felt more like a museum than a home. The table, a slab of mahogany that could comfortably seat 20, was set for only 5. David, Eleanor, her father Marcus, her mother Catherine, and her brother Leo. The air was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary and unspoken grievances. For weeks, the tension had been a low hum beneath the surface of their lives. That night, it became a screaming siren. Marcus Thorn, a man whose presence filled any room with an uncomfortable mixture of bonhomie and menace, cleared his throat. He was the patriarch, the founder of Thorn Consolidated, a regional real estate empire built on aggressive acquisitions and his own unshakable self-regard. He looked at David not like a son-in-law, but like an underperforming asset he was about to liquidate. "David," he began, his voice a low rumble that commanded absolute silence. Catherine stopped pretending to arrange the silver. Leo, a younger, softer version of his father, leaned forward with a smug, predatory gleam in his eyes. "We have a problem, a significant one." David placed his fork down, his own dinner untouched. He knew what was coming. He had felt the ground shifting beneath him for months. "Oh?" he said, his voice calm, measured. It was a tone that always infuriated them with its lack of panic. "It's about the Westgate portfolio," Leo chimed in, unable to wait for his father to deliver the blow. "The due diligence you ran, it was, well, it was a mess, inaccurate, incompetent, to be frank. We almost walked into a financial buzzsaw because of your analysis." David met his brother-in-law's gaze. Leo had always resented him, seeing his quiet competence as a reproach to his own loud mediocrity. "My analysis of the Westgate portfolio concluded that the deal was over-leveraged and the occupancy projections were fraudulent. I advised against the acquisition in 3 separate reports. Reports that were buried in pessimistic nonsense," Marcus boomed, slamming a meaty fist on the table, making the crystal water glasses tremble. "You have no vision, David, no killer instinct. You're a numbers clerk, not a strategist. Leo had to go in behind you, clean up your mess, and renegotiate the terms. He saved the company millions." It was a lie, a clean, bold, breathtaking lie. David knew the Westgate deal was a house of cards. Leo, desperate to impress his father, had simply ignored the warnings and pushed the deal through, likely by sweetening the terms to a point of absurdity. The millions saved were a fiction he had concocted for this very moment. David could have fought. He could have pulled up the data, the emails, the meticulously documented reports he had submitted. He could have exposed Leo for the fool he was. But he looked at Eleanor, sitting beside him, her face a perfect porcelain blank. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her father, her expression one of unwavering, filial loyalty. In that moment, David understood. This wasn't a business disagreement. It was an execution. The verdict had already been decided. The trial was just a formality. "So, that's it?" David asked, his voice still unnervingly quiet. "Your position at Thorne Consolidated is terminated, effective immediately," Marcus declared, as if bestowing a grand pronouncement. "We'll be generous. 3 months severance, for Eleanor's sake." The mention of her name was the cue. Eleanor finally turned to him. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no flicker of shared history, only a chilling, transactional coldness. "And David," she said, her voice smooth as polished ice, "I think it's time we were honest with ourselves. Us, it hasn't been working for a very long time. I've spoken to my lawyer. The papers will be drawn up tomorrow. It will be a clean break. The house is in my name, the cars, the accounts. It's for the best, for the children." "For the children," David repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "They need stability," she continued, a righteous sheen in her eyes. "They need to be in their home, their school, with a parent who can provide for them. You won't be in a position to do that." The implication was clear. He was being rendered destitute. A man with no job, no home, no money. A man who would be legally declared unfit to provide. He looked around the table, Marcus stern and triumphant, Leo smirking, Catherine, his mother-in-law, staring at her plate, her silence a form of loud, ringing approval, and Eleanor, his wife, dismantling their life with the detached precision of a bomb disposal expert. They were a united front, a pack, and he was the prey they had finally cornered. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. He folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and pushed his chair back. "I see," he said, and in that moment they saw only a defeated man. They couldn't see the complex machinery of his mind already whirring, calculating, and shifting from defense to a long-prepared, devastating offense. They thought they were closing a book. They had no idea they had just turned the first page of his. The apartment was small, not cozy small, but functionally, almost painfully small. It was a one-bedroom on the fourth floor of a nondescript building on the other side of town, the side the Thorns referred to as over there. The walls were a sterile off-white, and the air smelled faintly of old paint and the curry from the apartment next door. The single window looked out onto a brick wall. It was a universe away from the sweeping lawns and sun-drenched rooms of the house he had left behind. For the first few days, the silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. At the Thorn house, there was always noise. The distant chime of the grandfather clock, the hum of the pool filter, the children's laughter, or arguments, echoing down the hall. Here the silence was broken only by the groan of the building's ancient elevator and the distant wail of sirens. It was the sound of solitude. David unpacked his duffel bag, the task taking less than 5 minutes. He placed his few clothes in the cheap particle board dresser, his toothbrush in the bathroom's rusted medicine cabinet. The last item was the leather-bound journal. He handled it with a reverence that was completely at odds with its simple appearance. The leather was soft and worn at the edges, the pages filled with his small, neat handwriting. It looked like a diary, something an English professor might carry. It was, in fact, a ledger, a meticulously detailed record of a second life Eleanor and her family knew nothing about. He sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress that served as his bed and opened it. The first entry was dated 10 years ago, shortly after his own father had passed away. His father had been a high school history teacher, a man of modest means but deep integrity. The Thorns had often spoken of him with a kind of pitying condescension. Such a noble, if pointless, profession, Catherine had once remarked. His inheritance had been small, just $50,000, a sum Leo would lose on a bad weekend in Vegas. The Thorns assumed he had spent it years ago, probably on some frivolous gadget or a down payment on the first car he'd had when he met Eleanor. They were wrong. David, the quiet numbers clerk, the man with no killer instinct, had taken that $50,000 and planted a seed. He was a financial analyst by trade, but at Thorn Consolidated, he was a cart horse, blinkered and tasked with pulling their predetermined loads. They wanted reports that confirmed their biases, not ones that challenged them. But on his own time, with his own money, he was a different creature entirely. He was a hunter. He had a gift for seeing patterns others missed, for spotting undervalued assets in obscure markets, for understanding the subtle tectonics of the financial world. He flipped through the pages of the journal. Each entry was a trade, an investment, a decision. A small stake in a biotech startup just before its breakthrough drug was approved. An early investment in a cryptocurrency everyone else had dismissed as a fad. A calculated short sell on a company whose flamboyant CEO he correctly identified as a fraud. The numbers grew, quietly, exponentially. The initial 50,000 had become 100. 100 became 1,000,000. 1,000,000 became 10. The entries were precise, unemotional, but together they told an epic story of silent, stunning success. The current value, noted on the last page just a week prior, was a figure that would have made Marcus Thorn's blood run cold. He closed the journal. This was his secret, his power. For years he had kept it hidden, not out of fear, but out of a strange, misplaced sense of hope. He thought one day he might reveal it to Eleanor, not to gloat, but to show her that he was her partner, not her dependent. He'd imagined a moment where they could finally escape her family's gravitational pull and build something that was truly theirs. That hope had been a fool's dream. The money was no longer a tool for building a shared future. It was now a weapon. The first phone call with the children was scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number for the landline at the house. Eleanor answered on the second ring. "You have 15 minutes, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. There was no hello, no how are you, just a clinical statement of terms. Eleanor, please. Don't. You have 15 minutes. I'm putting you on speakerphone. Then he heard Lily's small voice. Daddy? Hi, sweetie. Hi, my angel, he said, his own voice thick with emotion he was trying desperately to suppress. Mommy says you're on a work trip, said Thomas, his older son. She says your work is very complicated now. David could hear the coaching in the words. He could picture Eleanor standing over them, arms crossed, her face a mask of stern instruction. That's right, buddy. It's a little complicated right now, but I want you to know that I love you both more than anything in the world, and I'm thinking about you every single minute. When are you coming home? Lily asked, her voice wobbling. The question was a knife in his heart. Before he could answer, Eleanor's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. Lily, don't bother your father with silly questions. He's very busy. Say goodbye now. But Mommy, say goodbye. He heard a brief scuffle, a muffled sob from Lily, and then the line went dead. David sat there, phone in hand, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like an angry insect. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, more profound and more painful than before. He leaned forward, resting his head in his hands, and for the first time since the door had clicked shut, he felt the hot sting of tears. They weren't tears of self-pity, they were tears of rage, a cold, clarifying rage. They had not just taken his house and his job. They were trying to poison his children against him. They were trying to erase him. He stood up and walked to the window, staring at the brick wall. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The grief was a storm inside him, but at its center, there was a point of absolute stillness. A core of resolve as hard and as clear as a diamond. The game had rules. He had always played by them. Now, he realized the Thorns had been playing a different game entirely, one with no rules at all. It was time, he decided, to teach them his. He picked up his phone again, but this time he dialed a different number. A number he had saved under the simple contact name, Alistair. Alistair Finch's office was the antithesis of the Thorn Consolidated Headquarters. Where the Thorn building was a monument to modern chrome and glass arrogance, Finch's chambers were old world, paneled in dark wood and lined with books that smelled of leather and time. Finch himself was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that held a lifetime of observing human folly. He was a corporate lawyer, but his real expertise was in the subtle art of leverage and the patient dismantling of empires. They are attempting to erase you, David, Finch said, peering over a stack of documents David had provided. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a doctor diagnosing a common, if unpleasant, disease. It's a classic maneuver of the dynastic narcissist. Isolate the target, strip their resources, control the narrative, and then redefine them as a non-entity. They are not just divorcing you, they are trying to unperson you. They are using my children as leverage, David said, his voice tight. Of course, Finch nodded, steepling his long fingers. The children are the ultimate emotional weapon. They will be both the justification for their cruelty and the means of inflicting it. We're doing it for the children, while simultaneously telling them their father is a failure. It's textbook. David slid his leather journal across the polished desk. This is the part they don't know. The part they never thought to ask about. Finch opened the journal. He was silent for a long time, his sharp eyes scanning the neat columns of figures, dates, and transactions. He turned the pages slowly, his expression shifting from professional interest to quiet astonishment. He was one of the few people in the world who could look at those dry entries and understand the sheer scale of the achievement they represented. He saw the genius, the patience, the discipline. When he finally looked up, the professional detachment in his eyes had been replaced by a spark of genuine admiration. My God, David, he breathed, you're not a ghost, you're a leviathan. You've been swimming in the deep while they were splashing in the shallows. I need to secure my access to my children, David said, his focus singular. That is the first priority, the rest is secondary. Access is tied to perception, Finch countered gently. The court will listen to Eleanor's narrative. A successful, stable mother. A suddenly unemployed, homeless father. We need to change that narrative. Not just change it, we need to shatter it. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, strategic smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a chess master who sees a checkmate in 12 moves. And to do that, we will let them continue to believe they have won. We will let their arrogance be their guide. Hubris, David, is the most reliable and effective poison. The first public test of David's resolve came 2 weeks later at the fall parent-teacher conference for Lily's elementary school. He had to fight through a series of condescending emails from Eleanor just to be informed of the time. He arrived early, dressed in simple but clean trousers and a pressed button-down shirt. He felt a dozen eyes on him as he walked into the bustling gymnasium. This was Eleanor's world, the world of the Northwood elite. He was now an outsider, a curiosity. He saw her across the room, holding court with a group of other mothers. She was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking blazer, laughing at something one of the other women said. Her mother, Catherine, was at her side, a sentinel of social superiority. As David approached the sign-up sheet for Lily's teacher, he saw Eleanor notice him. Her smile tightened. She whispered something to her mother, and a moment later, the two of them drifted over, their path designed to intercept him. David, Eleanor said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd be busy, looking for a new position. I'm never too busy for Lily, he replied evenly, not rising to the bait. Catherine looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his sensible, inexpensive shoes. It's important to keep up appearances, I suppose, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Though it must be difficult under the circumstances. A woman David recognized as the mother of one of Lily's friends approached them. Eleanor, Catherine, and David, hello. The pause before his name was infinitesimal, but it was there. He was an afterthought. We were just telling David how brave he is to show his face, Eleanor said, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. It takes a lot of courage to start over from scratch at his age. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over him. Every word was a carefully chosen dart, dipped in the poison of public pity. He could feel the other parents listening, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. They were watching the public fall of a man they once saw as an equal. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them that his scratch was a fortune that could buy and sell this entire school district. He wanted to wipe the smug, condescending look off Eleanor's face. Instead, he remembered Finch's words. Let their arrogance be their guide. He gave a small, dignified nod. It's a time of transition, he said, his voice calm. But my priority remains my children. It always will. He then turned his back on them, deliberately and calmly, and walked over to speak with Lily's teacher, leaving Eleanor and Catherine standing there, their final, cutting remark left unsaid, hanging uselessly in the air. He could feel their fury at his refusal to crumble. He had not given them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Later that afternoon, sitting in Alistair Finch's office, he recounted the incident. Finch listened patiently, his face unreadable. Good, he said when David had finished. That was a test, and you passed. You demonstrated restraint. To them, it looked like weakness, like a dog that knows its place. They will grow more confident, more careless. Finch then swiveled his monitor around. On the screen was a news article from a financial journal. The headline read, Thorne Consolidated eyes landmark acquisition of Arion Properties. And here, Finch said, tapping the screen, is where their carelessness will become their undoing. Marcus Thorne's legacy project. David leaned forward. Arion Properties. He knew it well. It was a bloated, overhyped commercial real estate firm with a portfolio full of toxic assets and questionable leases. It was, in fact, the sister company to the Westgate portfolio he had warned them about. It was a trap dressed up as a trophy. "He's actually going through with it," David said, a sense of disbelief mixing with a dawning understanding. "Leo must have sold him on it." "Leo sold him on it, and you are no longer there to be the voice of reason," Finch confirmed. "They are flying blind, full of confidence, with a co-pilot who can't read a map. And this, David, is where our Leviathan learns to hunt." The plan Alistair Finch laid out was audacious, complex, and beautiful in its brutal simplicity. It was a financial pincer movement, a corporate chess game where the Thorns didn't even know they were on the board. The first phase was silent and invisible. Using a series of shell corporations and offshore holding companies, David began to buy Arian Properties debt. Not its stock, but its debt, from secondary lenders who were growing nervous about the company's stability. It was a quiet, unglamorous process, buying up bonds and loan agreements at a discount. To the outside world, it looked like vultures picking over a potential carcass. To David and Finch, it was the first turn of the key in a very large lock. The second phase was even bolder. Thorn Consolidated would need a massive line of credit to finance the acquisition. They would go to their primary bank, a large conservative institution. But a deal of this size required syndication, meaning other, smaller financial entities would need to buy into the loan to spread the risk. Finch, through his vast network of contacts, identified the likely participants. One of them was a private equity firm in Zurich with a reputation for aggressive, high-risk plays. "They will see Thorn Consolidated as a stable, blue-chip client," Finch explained, pointing to a flowchart he'd drawn on a whiteboard. "They will happily take a 10% stake in the loan syndication. What they won't know is that our holding company, North Star Investments, will have already acquired a controlling interest in them the week before." David stared at the board. He was essentially becoming his own family's hidden, hostile banker. He would own the debt of the company they were trying to buy, and he would own a piece of the bank lending them the money to do it. They were walking into a cage they didn't even know existed. "Marcus will see this as his crowning achievement," David murmured, tracing the lines on the board with his finger. "He'll announce it at the annual shareholders meeting in 3 months." "Precisely," Finch said. "He will want maximum fanfare. He will build a stage, invite the press, and prepare a speech about his vision and his legacy. And on that stage, in front of everyone, we will pull the lever." The next 3 months were a study in contrasts. For the Thorns, it was a season of triumph. Marcus was more bombastic than ever, holding court at his club, dropping hints about a deal that would redefine the skyline. Leo, lauded as the family's new visionary, bought a new sports car and was featured in a local business magazine under the headline, "The New Prince of Property." Eleanor, free from her failed husband, leaned into her role as the martyred, resilient single mother, her social calendar filled with charity luncheons and galas. She was thriving in the drama, the undisputed queen of her own tragic, heroic narrative. They saw David only once during this period. It was at a weekend soccer game for Thomas's team. David stood on the sidelines, alone, a thermos of coffee in his hand. Eleanor arrived late with Marcus, both of them radiating success. They pointedly ignored David, making a show of greeting the other parents, their laughter loud and confident. At one point, Thomas scored a goal and looked immediately to the sidelines. His eyes found David first, and he broke into a huge grin. David gave him a thumbs up, his heart swelling. Then Thomas looked toward his mother and grandfather. Eleanor was busy talking to another parent, and Marcus was on his phone. The boy's smile faltered for just a second. It was a tiny moment, but David saw it. It was everything. For David, these months were a time of quiet, monastic focus. His days were spent in a small, rented office space, not far from his apartment, surrounded by monitors displaying market data from around the globe. He worked with a surgical precision, executing the trades and transactions Finch's strategy required. He spoke to his children during his allotted, monitored 15-minute calls, his voice always calm and loving, never once betraying the anger or the stress. He endured Eleanor's clipped, dismissive tone and her constant reminders of his situation. He filled the pages of his journal. The entries were no longer just about accumulating wealth. They were about deploying it. He was moving vast sums of money as silently as a submarine gliding through the deep ocean. Northstar Investments, his primary holding company, was now a formidable, if completely anonymous entity. It was the Leviathan, and it was getting ready to surface. The night before the Thorne Consolidated annual shareholders meeting, David sat in his small apartment. The city lights, once a reminder of his isolation, now seemed like a glittering tapestry of possibilities. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Alistair Finch had confirmed that Marcus was planning to announce the Arion acquisition as the grand finale of the meeting. The press had been invited. It was designed to be a coronation. David felt a strange sense of calm, the quiet that comes before a storm. This wasn't just about money or revenge anymore. He looked at a framed photo on his nightstand, the only personal item he'd brought from the house. It was of him with Lily and Thomas, taken a year ago at the beach. They were all laughing, covered in sand, the sun setting behind them. This was about them. It was about reclaiming his role as their father, not as a provider of things, but as an example of integrity and strength. It was about showing them that you don't let bullies win, no matter how powerful they seem. He opened his journal to a fresh page. He didn't write down numbers or transactions. He wrote down a list. It wasn't a list of grievances, not yet. It was a list of principles. Respect is earned. Integrity is non-negotiable. Family is a responsibility, not a weapon. True strength is quiet. He closed the book and stood up, looking out the window at the brick wall. For the first time, he noticed a small, tenacious vine had found a crack and was slowly, patiently making its way to the top. He smiled. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow the vine reaches the sun. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was electric with anticipation. Hundreds of shareholders, employees, and members of the press milled about, sipping coffee and eating complimentary pastries. The stage was dominated by a massive screen bearing the Thorne Consolidated logo, flanked by towering floral arrangements. The atmosphere was less like a shareholders' meeting and more like a political rally. This was Marcus Thorne's kingdom, and today was his victory parade. David was not there. He was 3 blocks away, in the quiet, wood-paneled conference room of Alistair Finch's law firm, watching a live feed of the event on a large monitor. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that he had purchased for this specific occasion. It was a suit that spoke not of flash, but of substance. It was the armor for the final act. On the screen, Marcus Thorne strode to the podium to thunderous applause. He was in his element, beaming, his large frame exuding an aura of indomitable power. "Thank you, he boomed, spreading his arms wide as if to embrace the entire room. "Welcome to the future of Thorne Consolidated." He launched into a soaring speech, recounting the company's history, his own humble beginnings, a narrative that grew more humble with each telling, and the bright future ahead. He praised his team, giving special, patronizing mention to his son. "And I must thank my son, Leo," Marcus declared, gesturing to Leo in the front row, who puffed up like a peacock. A young man with the vision and the courage to see opportunities others miss. He has been instrumental in our next great leap forward. David watched, his face impassive. He knew Leo's only vision was a desperate need for his father's approval, and his courage was the recklessness of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. "For months," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, excited hush, "we have been working on a transaction that will not just grow our company, but transform it. A landmark deal that will secure our legacy for generations to come. Today, I am proud to announce that Thorne Consolidated has entered into a definitive agreement to acquire Arion Properties. The room erupted. The name Arion was synonymous with aggressive expansion. On paper, it looked like a brilliant, audacious move. The screen behind Marcus flashed with artist renderings of gleaming new skyscrapers and bustling commercial developments. It was a masterclass in salesmanship. Marcus let the applause wash over him for a full minute before raising his hands for silence. This deal represents the culmination of our core values: boldness, vision, and relentless growth. The financing is secured, the contracts are signed, the future is ours. Back in Finch's office, Alistair turned to David. "That's the cue," he said quietly. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Execute," he said, and hung up. In the ballroom, Marcus was about to take questions when a young, terrified-looking assistant scurried onto the stage and whispered urgently in his ear. Marcus's triumphant smile faltered. He waved her away impatiently, but she persisted, her eyes wide with panic. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as they sensed the disruption. Marcus's face darkened. He leaned in, listening, and a subtle change came over him. The jovial mask slipped, revealing a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. He straightened up, forcing the smile back onto his face, though it was now a brittle, unconvincing thing. "Ladies and gentlemen, a minor administrative matter. Please enjoy the refreshments. We will resume in a few moments." He strode off the stage, his movements stiff, and disappeared into a private room behind the ballroom. Leo and a few key executives followed, their faces etched with concern. In Finch's office, a second monitor came to life, showing a view from a hidden camera in that very room. Marcus was pacing, his face flushed with anger. "What in God's name is going on? What do you mean the financing has a complication?" he roared at his CFO. "Sir, our bank just called," the man stammered, holding his phone like a venomous snake. "The lead underwriter for the syndication loan. They've invoked the material adverse change clause. They're pulling their funding." "They can't do that," Leo blustered. "We have a contract." "They can if the asset being acquired is proven to be impaired," the CFO said, his voice trembling. "Sir, it seems a majority of Arion Properties' outstanding debt was just purchased by a single entity. That entity has filed a notice of default, claiming fraudulent accounting in Arion's lease agreements. They say the company is functionally insolvent." Marcus stared at him, his mouth agape. "What entity? Who would do this?" As if on cue, the door to the private room opened. It wasn't a hotel staffer. It was Alistair Finch, looking calm, composed, and utterly in control. He carried a slim leather briefcase. "That would be my client," Finch said, his voice cutting through the panicked chatter like a scalpel. He placed the briefcase on the table and opened it. "Good morning, Marcus. I believe you have some questions about the Arion acquisition." The scene in the back room was one of complete pandemonium frozen into a stunned tableau. Marcus Thorne, a man used to commanding any space he entered, looked at Alistair Finch as if he were a ghost. Leo was sputtering, his face a blotchy red. The CFO looked like he was about to be physically ill. "Finch," Marcus growled, recovering a fraction of his bluster. "What is the meaning of this? You represent some vulture fund trying to greenmail us? This is my legacy you're interfering with." "On the contrary, Marcus," Finch replied smoothly, taking a sheaf of documents from his briefcase. "My client has no interest in greenmail. He has an interest in sound financial practice. And Arion Properties, as your own former analyst tried to tell you, is not a sound investment. It's a beautifully decorated house with no foundation." He laid the first document on the table. "This is a confirmation of my client's controlling interest in Arion's senior secured debt. As of 90 minutes ago, my client is their primary creditor, and we have exercised our right to forensic accounting, which has revealed irregularities, widespread ones." He laid down a second document. "And this," he continued, his voice dangerously mild, "is a confirmation that my client's holding company, North Star Investments, is the majority shareholder in the Zurich-based private equity firm that held a critical 10% stake in your acquisition loan. The material adverse change clause was invoked at our direction. The financing for your deal is, I'm afraid, gone. The blood drained from Marcus's face. He understood now. This wasn't a random attack. This was a coordinated, strategic assault of breathtaking sophistication. He was trapped. If he backed out of the deal, his stock would plummet, and he would be publicly humiliated. If he tried to go forward, he had no money and was trying to buy a company that was about to be declared bankrupt by its new creditor. Who? Marcus whispered, the single word hoarse with disbelief. Who is your client? Finch gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the door. And then, the door opened. David walked in. The silence that fell upon the room was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure. He was not the David they remembered, the quiet, slightly stooped man in the ill-fitting suits provided by the company. This David stood tall, his posture radiating a quiet confidence that was more intimidating than any of Marcus's booming rants. The suit he wore was a masterpiece of understated elegance, a dark charcoal wool that fit him perfectly. It was the kind of suit that didn't shout its price, but whispered of immense, unassailable wealth. He met Marcus's stunned gaze, then let his eyes drift to Leo, whose jaw was hanging open in a caricature of shock. He did not look at them with hatred or even anger. He looked at them with a kind of detached, analytical calm, like a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Hello, Marcus." "Leo," he said. His voice was the same quiet, measured tone they had always dismissed, but now it landed with the force of a physical blow. It was Leo who broke the silence, his voice a high-pitched squeak of denial. "You? This is a joke. You're nobody. You're unemployed. You live in some shoebox across town." David's gaze settled on his brother-in-law. "You're right, Leo. I am unemployed. By you. As for where I live, that's a temporary arrangement. Unlike your company's financial situation, which is, I'm afraid, quite permanent." Marcus finally found his voice. It was a strangled, rasping sound. "How?" "You never thought to ask, did you?" David said, walking slowly toward the table. He didn't swagger. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace. "You saw what you wanted to see, a charity case, a dependent. You were so busy looking down on me that you never thought to look at what I was building." He glanced at Alistair Finch, who handed him another file. David opened it and slid it across the table to Marcus. "While you were leveraging the company to the hilt to buy a worthless trophy," David explained, "I was taking a different approach. I was building a foundation. The small inheritance my father left me, you all laughed about it. You called him a noble failure. That noble failure's legacy is now the controlling creditor of your grand acquisition and a key investor in your own debt. The irony, I'm sure, is not lost on you." The full, devastating reality of the situation finally crashed down on Marcus Thorne. This wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. This was personal. This was a meticulously planned, deeply personal act of retribution. He, the great Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, had been brought to his knees by the quiet, unassuming man he had thrown out like garbage. He sank into a chair, his face ashen, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "What do you want, David?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper. "Money? You want to be bought out? Name your price." David almost smiled. It was a sad, tired expression. "You still don't get it, do you, Marcus? This was never about money. I have more money than you could comprehend. This is about consequences." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "You and your family live in a world without consequences. You are arrogant, you are cruel, and you are incompetent, but you're protected by a wall of money and status. Today that wall comes down." He looked from Marcus to Leo, his gaze finally hardening. "You tried to destroy my career. You tried to take my children. You tried to erase my existence. You didn't just fire me, you tried to humiliate me. You did it publicly. You enjoyed it. He took a step closer, and for the first time the Thorns saw a flicker of the cold, hard steel beneath his calm exterior. So, here are the consequences. The Arian deal is dead. I will see to it that the company is dismantled and its assets sold off to pay its creditors, starting with me. The news of its insolvency and Thorn Consolidated's failed bid will be public within the hour. Your stock is going to fall off a cliff. The banks will call in your loans. The company your father built, Marcus, will be bankrupt by the end of the quarter. Leo let out a choked sob. You can't do this. I can, David said simply. I already have. However, he paused again, a masterful theatrical beat. He had their complete, terrified attention. I am also a pragmatist. A bankrupt company is of no use to anyone, including my children, whose mother, for the time being, still bears the Thorn name. He looked directly at Marcus. So I will offer you a deal, a single path to survival. Not for your sake, but for the sake of the hundreds of employees who don't deserve to lose their jobs because of your hubris. The immediate aftermath was a blur of frantic, whispered conversations and panicked phone calls. The grand shareholders' meeting was unceremoniously canceled due to a technical issue, a flimsy excuse that fooled no one. The press, smelling blood, descended into a frenzy of speculation. Within an hour, the first reports hit the financial newswires. Thorn Consolidated acquisition of Arian collapses amid insolvency rumors. The company's stock ticker turned into a waterfall of red. Back in the private room, Marcus Thorn sat slumped in his chair, a broken patriarch. Leo was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, a man completely out of his depth. Only David and Alistair Finch were calm. The terms are not negotiable, David stated, his voice cutting through the chaos. He began to list them, not as a vengeful tirade, but as a series of cold, hard business conditions. It was the list of grievances, translated into the language of corporate governance. 1, he began. Marcus, you will announce your immediate retirement as chairman and CEO, effective today. The official reason will be health concerns. You will have no further role in the company, no consultancy, no seat on the board. You are out. Marcus looked up, his eyes pleading. The company is my life. The company was your ego, David corrected him without malice. And your ego has become a terminal liability. 2. Leo, your position is also terminated. You will not receive a severance package. Your corporate credit cards and car will be returned by the end of the day. You are a demonstrated risk, and you will have no place in the new structure. Leo stopped pacing. You can't, my father. Your father is no longer in a position to help you, David said. You wanted to be a killer? This is what it looks like when you lose. He continued, his voice relentless. 3. I will assume the position of chairman of the board. I will appoint a new CEO, a professional from outside the family. The company will be restructured from the top down. My team, he gestured to Finch, will oversee the entire process. We will save the company, but it will be a different company. It will be run on competence, not nepotism. He paused, letting the terms sink in. This was not just a takeover, it was a complete ideological purge. He was erasing the Thorn legacy from Thorn Consolidated. And finally, David said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly as he came to the most important point. Eleanor. At the mention of her name, a flicker of hope appeared in Marcus's eyes. Family. Surely he wouldn't be cruel to his own wife, the mother of his children. Eleanor will have no say, no role, and no influence in this company. Her family trust, which holds a significant block of shares, will be subordinate to my controlling interest. Her financial security will be handled as part of our divorce settlement, which my lawyer, Mr. Finch, will be renegotiating. The terms will be fair, but they will not be extravagant. And the custody of our children, That will be changing immediately. This was the killing blow. Marcus looked utterly defeated. He had lost his company, his legacy, and now he realized he had cost his daughter her gilded life, and potentially her children. The arrogance that had defined him his entire life crumbled, leaving behind a frail, old man. "You agree to these terms," David concluded, "and I will use my resources to stabilize Thorn Consolidated. I will honor its debts and steer it through the storm. You refuse, and I will let it sink to the bottom of the ocean and buy up the salvage for pennies on the dollar. The choice is yours." There was no choice, and everyone in the room knew it. Marcus gave a slow, defeated nod. The great titan had been toppled. The news of David's ascension to chairman of Thorn Consolidated sent shockwaves through the city's business community. The story was irresistible. The spurned son-in-law, cast out and left for broke, returning as a mysterious, powerful financier to seize the family empire. The narrative they had tried to write for him, the failure, the charity case, was replaced by a new one. The genius, the strategist, the quiet killer. A few weeks later, the dust had begun to settle. David was not working from Marcus's opulent top-floor office. He had chosen a smaller, more functional space on a lower floor, a clear signal of a new corporate culture. The restructuring was brutal, but necessary. Leo was gone. Marcus was in a self-imposed exile, refusing to take calls. The company, though bruised, was stabilizing under the steady hand of the new CEO David had appointed and the quiet backing of Northstar Investments. Eleanor requested a meeting. She didn't summon him, she requested. He agreed to see her, not in his new office or her cavernous, empty house, but at a neutral location, a small, quiet cafe downtown. She arrived looking smaller than he remembered. The armor of her wealth and status had been stripped away, and she seemed diminished, uncertain. She was still beautiful, but there was a fragility to her now, a haunted look in her eyes. "David," she began, fumbling with her coffee cup, I don't understand. All this time, you had all that money? Why didn't you say anything?" It was the question he had expected, the question that revealed she still didn't get it. "What would I have said, Eleanor?" he asked gently. "That I didn't need your father's job? That the house we lived in was a fraction of my net worth? Would that have earned your respect? Or would it just have been a different kind of threat to your family's dominance?" She flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" he pressed, still calm. "Your father's first question when he heard what happened was, 'Name your price.' Your first question is, 'Why didn't you tell me about the money?' You both see the world through the same lens. Everything is a transaction, a measure of wealth and power." "I loved you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I believe you did. Once," he said, and he meant it. "A long time ago. But somewhere along the way, you started to love the status more. You chose your family's narrative over our partnership. You stood by and watched them tear me down, and you handed them the knife. You told our children their father was a failure." The tears now streamed down her face. "I was wrong, David. I was so wrong. I was a fool. Can't we try to fix this? For the children?" There it was again. For the children. The phrase she had once used as a weapon, now offered as a plea. He reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to place his gently on top of it for a brief moment. It was a gesture of finality, not reconciliation. "Our marriage is over, Eleanor. It was over the day you chose their side in that dining room. But you are the mother of my children, and I will not be cruel. You will be taken care of. You will have a comfortable life. But it will be your life, not your father's. The unearned privilege, the status, the power, that's gone." He leaned back. "As for the children, I am petitioning for primary custody. They will live with me. You will have generous visitation, provided you never, ever speak ill of me to them again. They need to see what a healthy, respectful, co-parenting relationship looks like. And they need to live in a home where worth isn't measured by the size of the house or the brand of the car. She stared at him, her face a mask of horror and despair. This was her true punishment, not the loss of money, but the loss of control, the loss of her children. She had tried to take them from him by rendering him powerless, and in the process she had handed him all the power to take them from her. The poetic justice was as perfect as it was devastating. "You can't do that to me, David," she sobbed. "I'm not doing this to you, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of a sad, final wisdom. "I'm doing it for them. There's a difference." He stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table. "Goodbye, Eleanor." 6 months after the day the great oak door had clicked shut, David stood on the porch of a new house. It wasn't a mansion. It was a handsome, welcoming colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street, a place with a big backyard and a basketball hoop over the garage door. It was a home, not a statement. The front door was painted a cheerful blue. Inside, he could hear the sounds of life. Lily was practicing a slightly off-key song on the piano, and Thomas was yelling at a video game. The smell of baking cookies hung in the air. This was his life now, a life he had built not on secrets and lies, but on a foundation of his own making. His relationship with his children was flourishing. Free from the toxic influence of the Thorne household, they were happier, more relaxed. He spent his evenings helping with homework, playing catch in the yard, and just talking. He was teaching them the lessons his own father had taught him, about integrity, hard work, and the quiet strength of character. He was giving them a different kind of inheritance. Thorne Consolidated, under its new leadership, was slowly recovering. It was a leaner, more ethical company. David remained chairman, but he was a hands-off leader, trusting the professionals he'd hired. His true work was here, within these walls. He received a call from Alistair Finch. "Just wanted to let you know, the final divorce decree came through," the lawyer said. "It's all signed and sealed. Eleanor didn't contest the custody arrangement." "How is she?" David asked. He felt no triumph, only a quiet melancholy. "She's adjusting," Finch said carefully. "She's living in a townhouse her mother bought for her. She sees the children on her weekends. I think, for the first time in her life, she's being forced to figure out who she is without the Thorne name attached." "Maybe that's a good thing," David said. "Perhaps," Finch agreed. "Redemption is a long road. Some people find their way. Others get lost. You, on the other hand, David, you built your own road." After the call, David walked into the living room. Lily stopped mangling the piano piece and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Daddy, I learned a new song." "I heard," he laughed, kissing the top of her head. "It's beautiful." Thomas came bounding down the stairs. "Dad, can we go shoot some hoops before it gets dark?" "You bet," David said, his heart full. As he stepped out into the backyard with his son, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn, he thought about the whirlwind of the past year. He had been brought to the lowest point in his life, publicly shamed and cast aside. But the Thornes had made a fatal error. They had judged him by their own shallow metrics of success. They saw the quiet exterior and assumed it was empty. They never realized that true worth isn't about the noise you make or the status you display. It's about the foundation you build, brick by patient brick, in the quiet, unseen places. They had taken everything they could see, but they had left him with everything that truly mattered: his integrity, his genius, and the love for his children that fueled it all. He had lost a house, and in the end, he had gained a home. It just goes to show you that the world often tries to tell you what you're worth. People will put you in a box, label you, and judge you based on what they see on the surface. But they can't see your heart. They can't measure your resilience. They don't know the strength you're building in silence. What do you think is the true measure of a person's worth? Is it what they have or who they are? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time, Remember, your value is your own to define.